All right, let's get straight into it. We're going to be parsing the really intricate details of regulatory investment restrictions for financial institutions. We're focusing on the depth you're going to need for your CP1 exam prep, so no basics, just the complex mechanics you absolutely need to master.
Okay, let's dive right into this quote. It really gets to the heart of the matter. We're starting not with the what, but the fundamental why. You see, financial markets are the engine of the economy, but they're also, by their very nature, volatile. So the core controversy, the constant push and pull, is finding that perfect balance between letting that engine run free and making sure it doesn't spectacularly blow up. So you might be asking yourself, why can't we just let these incredibly sophisticated institutions manage their own affairs? Well, this section is all about the foundational principles that pretty much force governments to step in and impose what can be some very, very strict controls on their investment activities. Now, what's really fascinating here is just how interconnected all these aims are. Maintaining confidence is everything. If that goes, the whole system can collapse. Consumer protection is a big one, because let's face it, there's a huge information gap between a massive institution and an individual. Efficient markets make sure capital goes where it should. And that last point, that is the big one. Almost every rule is designed, at its core, to prevent a systemic failure so bad that the government has to step in with a taxpayer-funded bailout as the lender of last resort.
And boom, right on cue, a direct hit from a past paper. This isn't just about rote memorization. It's about really understanding the deep-seated reasons behind every single regulatory rule you're going to come across. Can you recall those key aims we just went over?
So now that we've got the why down, let's get into the how. Regulators basically have two main tools in their toolbox to influence investment behavior. You've got your direct commands, which are the explicit rules, and then you have the more indirect incentives, which we call implicit controls.
The key difference here is the entire approach. Think of it this way. Explicit regulation is a hammer. It says, you shall not invest more than 10% in unlisted equities. It's super clear, but it can also be pretty inflexible. Implicit regulation, on the other hand, is much more like a scalpel. It doesn't outright ban you from doing something, it just makes it financially painful by jacking up the capital cost and changing that whole cost-benefit analysis.
Mismatching reserves are a perfect, and I mean a perfect, example of this implicit, scalpel-like approach in action. See, a regulator could just explicitly ban asset-liability mismatching, but instead they often say, you know what? Fine, go ahead and mismatch, but if you do, you have to lock up a significant chunk of your capital in this non-productive mismatching reserve. That capital can't be used for anything else, which just makes the whole strategy way less efficient, and it subtly guides the institution back toward a matched position.
Okay, let's really get into the specifics now. Understanding the precise levers that regulators can pull is absolutely key to mastering this topic. So, we're going to meticulously walk through the different categories of investment restrictions that you absolutely positively need to know for your exam.
Let's unpack this a bit. These are some of the most direct, in-your-face forms of control. Prohibiting certain asset types, like maybe some super speculative derivatives, is a blunt way to de-risk a portfolio. Limiting amounts, for example, capping property exposure, is all about preventing over-concentration. And then you have proportional restrictions, like forcing an institution to hold a minimum amount in government bonds, which ensures there's always a bedrock of highly secure liquid assets backing everything up.
Now, the focus shifts a little, moving away from the assets themselves to the actual entities you're dealing with. A counterparty limit, say capping your exposure to any single bank at 5% of your capital, is critical. It stops your institution from getting dragged down in a domino effect if one of your major partners fails. And custodianship rules? Well, that's the operational bedrock. They make sure the assets you say you own are actually there, they're secure, and they're properly accounted for.
Right, the principle of matching. This is the heart and soul of actuarial practice, and it's so important that regulation often enforces it. Currency matching is a complete no-brainer. If you have liabilities in euros, you better have assets in euros to avoid potentially catastrophic forex losses. Term and nature matching, that's a bit more nuanced. It's about making sure that if you have, say, long-term inflation-linked pension liabilities, you are holding long-term inflation-linked assets to meet those future promises.
This past question is a perfect test of your ability to apply these matching principles. So how will you answer this? You'd have to talk about the very specific nature of a DB scheme's liabilities. They're long-term, they're often inflation-linked, they're in a domestic currency, and then explain how all of that drives the need for an asset strategy laser-focused on matching those exact characteristics.
So to really see all this in action, we're going to use the Solvency II regime as a case study. It's a great way to see how all these principles get applied in a modern, sophisticated risk-based capital system.
The really important thing to grasp here is the massive paradigm shift this represents. We moved away from simple, prescriptive rulebooks to a much more dynamic, intelligent model. Under a regime like Solvency II, you don't just follow a checklist. Instead, the actual amount of risk you take on across every single part of your business becomes the number one thing that determines the capital buffer you're required to hold.
So here's how that actually works in practice. Let's say the model assigns a 40% capital charge to a high-risk equity portfolio, but only a 5% charge to government bonds. What does that mean? It means to hold 100 pounds of those equities, you have to set aside 40 pounds of capital. But to hold 100 pounds of bonds, you only need 5. See, the regulation doesn't forbid the equities, it just makes them incredibly capital-intensive, guiding your decisions by making prudence the most capital-efficient choice.
To manage investment risk effectively within a framework like this, you have to understand the external environment. And this question tests exactly that. Your ability to quantify risk depends entirely on your understanding of what drives asset values, things like the key economic influences on bond yields like inflation expectations, short-term interest rates, and fiscal policy.
All right, we have covered a huge amount of ground at a very, very deep level. So now let's consolidate everything we've talked about into a powerful revision tool that's going to help lock in this knowledge for your exams. Time for a high-level review just to crystallize all of these key points.
These are the absolute, non-negotiable takeaways. You have to understand the why, that's the rationale. The how, explicit versus implicit. The what, the specific types of restrictions. And the future, the logic of these modern risk-based capital systems. This is basically the entire framework on one slide.
And now for a quick, rapid-fire review of the essential terminology. As we go through the list on the next slide, I want you to test your instant recall of each of these core concepts.
Go through this list seriously. If any of these terms make you pause for even a second, you know exactly where to focus your revision. This is the core vocabulary of a competent actuary working in this space, and you really need to have it down cold.
And we'll end with a final thought, something that goes a little beyond the syllabus. We have embraced these incredibly sophisticated risk-based models because they seem so much more intelligent than simple prescriptive rules. But in doing so, are we truly eliminating risk, or are we just shifting it into a complex black box, a model that we might not fully understand until it's way too late? Something to think about.